In the quiet town of Elderspring, where time seemed to stand still and the air was filled with whispers of the past, there lived a young boy named Finn. Elderspring was a beautiful place, surrounded by tall towering trees and rolling hills that rolled like giant green waves. In the distance, a sparkling river wound its way through the landscape, gurgling and splashing merrily as it journeyed towards the great unknown. The town was small, nestled between fields of wildflowers and patches of colorful, bending grass. On sunny days, the sky was a brilliant blue, dotted with fluffy white clouds that looked like cotton candy. However, today, the sky was a dull gray, thick with ominous clouds that seemed to hang low, casting eerie shadows over everything beneath them. Finn lived in an old house, a grand structure with creaking floorboards and a roof that slanted in peculiar angles. It stood proudly at the end of a narrow, winding lane, surrounded by a white picket fence that leaned slightly to the left. The house was a relic from a time long past, filled with cozy corners and hidden spaces, but most importantly, it had an attic. This attic had always piqued Finn's curiosity, for it held the promise of adventure and the possibility of discovering lost treasures. Family tales often spoke of the attic as a mysterious place, a realm where shadows danced, and dust settled over forgotten memories like a blanket of silence. On this particularly rainy afternoon, when the wind howled like a lonely wolf outside and the sun had disappeared behind heavy clouds, Finn could no longer resist the urge to explore this hidden world. The sound of raindrops against the window panes made everything feel cozy and adventurous at the same time, urging him to find something unknown. Armed with nothing but a small flashlight he had borrowed from the kitchen drawer, he took a deep breath, steadying his nerves, and ventured up the narrow staircase that creaked beneath his feet. Each step echoed through the house, the noise mingling with the gusts of chilling wind, as if the house itself was trying to warn him against his decision. Maybe it's just the wind, Finn thought, shaking off a shiver that crawled up his spine. He pushed open the trap door leading to the attic, and as he did, a gust of musty air enveloped him, swirling around like a ghostly embrace. The attic was dimly lit, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the darkness, revealing old furniture cloaked in white sheets that fluttered slightly, like ghosts waiting to be unveiled. Finn stepped inside, his heart beating faster, a rhythm that echoed in the stillness around him. Straight ahead, shadows clung to the walls, twisting and turning as if they were alive. Old suitcases stacked atop one another towered like ancient monuments, rusted antiques stood proudly in corners, and boxes thick with dust whispered stories from years long gone. The air smelled stale, and he inhaled deeply, imagining the tales hidden within these forgotten treasures. As he moved further into the attic, an excitement bubbled within him, mingling with a tinge of fear. He brushed his fingers along the rough surface of an old table, the texture unsettling as he pushed through stacks of forgotten things. In the far corner, he spotted a trunk, its metal locks rusted and worn. He knelt down to examine it more closely, his fingers tingling with anticipation. But just as he was about to open it, something else caught his eye. There, on a dusty pedestal like a trophy waiting to be claimed, was a strange mask. Finn walked over, his curiosity piqued. The mask was peculiar and intriguing, adorned with intricate patterns that twisted and turned like a labyrinth. Its hollow eyes stared vacantly into the abyss of the attic, dark and empty, yet somehow beckoning. It felt oddly alive in his hands, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. What could this be? Finn wondered, cradling it gently. Did it belong to a long-lost ancestor? Did it once hang in the town square during a festival? Or perhaps it was a relic tied to an old, haunting tale of Elderspring that faded into memory? As Finn examined the mask closely, he could see the careful carvings that adorned its surface. They were both beautiful and unsettling, evoking a shiver down his spine. He could almost feel the stories hiding in those tiny etchings. What did they mean? Every groove and swirl held a secret, and he felt, for a moment, as if they were whispering directly to him. Finn's fingers traced the jagged edges of the mask, and suddenly, he thought he could hear a low, guttural whisper, like a voice beckoning from beneath the mask. The attic seemed to grow colder as he held it, the shadows lengthening around him as if they were inching closer. Despite the dread coiling in his stomach, an irresistible urge sparked within him to try the mask on. He chuckled softly, shaking his head at his own absurdity. What's the worst that could happen? He thought. With a hint of trepidation but a great deal of excitement, Finn lifted the mask to his face. The moment it pressed against his skin, a wave of icy fog enveloped him, swallowing him whole and transforming his surroundings into a blinding void. His flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. No, no, no. Finn shouted in panic, his breath coming in quick, frightened gasps. He tried to pull the mask off, but it felt as if it had fused to his skin, holding him tightly, refusing to release its grip. Panic surged through him like a storm. Just then, he felt a petrifying force wrap around him, as if the very air had become thick with an unexplainable dread. There were no words, yet somehow, he understood that an evil presence loomed near, whispering thoughts filled with malice that clawed at the edges of his mind. It was as if the darkness had a will of its own, closing in on him, trapping him in a web of fear. As he stood there, paralyzed by terror, Finn could feel something cold brush against the back of his neck. It was a wrongness, a sensation of foreboding, as if death itself had come to collect him. He could sense the presence lurking behind him, malevolent and sinister, and though dread gripped his heart like a vice, he couldn't turn around to face whatever it was. It was as if he was trapped within a nightmare, circling endlessly in a blasphemous cycle of terror. Thoughts raced through his mind as he desperately tried to remember the tales his grandmother had told him about the attic and its haunted history. What was it she said? He thought. Something about ancient spirits or lost souls. The stories had always intrigued him, and they filled his imagination with vivid images of adventure and fright. He tried to breathe, to calm down, but nothing seemed to work. Everything was heavy, as if the weight of the attic pressed down upon him, suffocating and consuming. The sense of wrongness grew, dark tendrils wrapping around him, and he felt himself slipping further into the abyss. Help, someone, please. He screamed in his mind, wishing for anyone to hear him, to rescue him from this nightmare that twisted around him like smoke. Then, as if responding to his silent call, Finn felt a change in the air. The darkness shifted, swirling around him like a dark mist, and he heard a voice, soft and distant, yet filled with a strange comfort. Finn, it called, echoing through the void. Finn, you must find your strength. The mask shows you visions. Do not be afraid. Who's there? Finn tried to shout, though it came out as a whisper. The voice trembled through him, wrapping around his heart in a gentle embrace. It felt familiar, even though he could not place it. You have the power to confront your fears. Trust in what you see. The truth awaits. As the voice faded, a soft light began to flicker in the darkness, emerging from the depths of the mask. The shadows danced and swirled like ribbons before him, and Finn felt an unexpected warmth spreading through him. It was like sunlight breaking through heavy storm clouds, bringing clarity and hope. He realized that the mask itself was not meant to harm him, but to help him uncover the secrets buried deep within. Suddenly, fragments of visions swirled before him. Images of his town, Elderspring, its historical events played out like a movie. He saw the founding families, their triumphs, but he also saw hardships and losses, as well as love and unity that had woven the fabric of his community. He saw faces, people he recognized and some he didn't, each holding a piece of the past. Some looked weary and worn, but others sparkled with joy and laughter. With each image, Finn felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He realized that the stories his family had passed down held grains of truth, shaped by the events they experienced. The darkness that once felt so terrible was now a canvas of histories waiting to be explored. This is incredible, Finn exclaimed, his voice steady now, filled with wonder instead of fear. I will uncover these truths, he vowed softly to himself. The shadows around him pulsed with energy, and he felt himself taking control. The mask had not trapped him, it had opened a gateway to understanding and adventure. I'm not afraid anymore. Determined, he focused his thoughts, ready to weave his own tale among those who came before him. The cold that once gripped him began to melt away, and instead, Finn felt warmth surround him, igniting a fire in his spirit. There was so much to discover, adventures both thrilling and scary, filled with hidden truths and remarkable heroes. With newfound courage, Finn gently began to lift the mask off his face. I can do this, he whispered to himself, finally feeling light and free. As he removed the mask, the attic came back into focus, the shadows no longer suffocating. Light flooded back in from the small attic window, ruffled by the wind as it spread across the wooden floor. Finn stood there, heart racing but filled with excitement instead of dread. The mask had shown him something extraordinary, something he would never forget. He glanced back at it, knowing that it was only the beginning of his adventures. "I'll be back," he promised the mask with a grin, a sense of victory radiating through him. As he descended the stairs, the stories of the past alive in his mind, Finn felt a sense of purpose brighten his spirit. This was the first step into the mystery of his town. The attic reveal had sparked something within him, a thirst for knowledge and a desire to explore the tales and secrets that Elderspring held. He could hear the faintest echoes of laughter and whispers as if the spirits of the attic were cheering him on in his quest. With his heart soaring high, Finn stepped into the familiar living room below, ready to share his discovery with the world and unearth the stories that connected him to the past. This attic adventure was only the beginning, a mere scratch on the surface of what Elderspring had in store. And Finn, with his brave heart and curious mind, was ready to explore every nook and cranny, unveiling the magic hidden just behind the shadows. Elderspring was more alive than ever in his eyes, and with each step, he knew himself to be a part of a grand tale that was still being written. The attic was no longer a place of fear, but a gateway to a universe of wonder, and he was determined to uncover all its secrets, one story at a time. Hours or perhaps mere moments passed as Finn remained in the suffocating darkness, the mask constricting any sense of reality. The whispers continued, rising in intensity, like a choir singing a wretched hymn. Each word seemed to pierce the silence, drumming rhythmically in his ears, vibrating through the very core of his being. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing tall, and chills raced down his spine. The air felt heavy, almost thick, as if it were trying to press down on him. Finn was trapped in a dream he couldn't wake up from, a nightmare that wrapped itself around him like a dark, suffocating blanket. Then, suddenly, a suffocating wave of clarity washed over him, dragging him back to reality, or what felt like reality. The attic appeared before him again, but now everything looked twisted, the objects blurred and swirling, as if the very fabric of the room was unspooling. The dusty old trunks and crooked shelves seemed to move, shifting like shadows coming to life. Shadows crept in the corners where the dim light struggled to reach, whispering secrets he couldn't quite hear, but he felt their presence like a cold draft on a hot summer day. With trembling hands, Finn grasped at the mask, determination ignited within him like a flickering flame in the deepest dark. He needed to rip it off, flee the attic, and escape whatever nightmare had engulfed him. His fingers clawed at the edges of the mask, searching for a way to pry it from his face. It felt like a heavy weight, squishing his cheeks, binding his thoughts, and making his heart race. But as he pulled, the mask seemed to tighten further, constricting around his skull. A melodic laughter rang starkly in the cramped space, dark and demonic, resonating off the rafters like a haunting song. Each echo felt like a blade slicing through his resolve, cutting deeper than any physical wound. Panic swelled within him, rising like a tide, overwhelming him. Heave, he thought, gritting his teeth as he heaved against the mask. A blood-curdling sense of helplessness gripped him, squeezing tighter than the mask itself. "No, I won't let it win," Finn shouted in his mind, fueled by a flicker of bravery. Then, as if summoned by his thoughts, memories burst forth. He remembered the old tales his grandmother had told him, sitting by the fireplace on cold winter nights. She would weave stories of things left undisturbed, of lone artifacts that should never be touched. Her voice was a soothing balm, filled with warmth, but also a warning that chilled his bones. She spoke about a curse that plagued the town, a curse that thrived on the souls of the curious. "The mask sees what you cannot," she used to say, her voice echoing in the dark corners of his mind, drowning in the very shadows Finn now faced. At that moment, Finn wished he had listened more carefully. He should have understood the dangers of meddling with things beyond comprehension. The warnings played like a broken record, each line repeating in his head. The wisdom of his grandmother felt like an anchor in the storm, grounding him amid the chaos. As the laughter faded into a haunting silence, Finn felt the weight of the shadows pressing down. What remained was thick silence, unsettling and cloying. Finn's heart thundered in his chest, pumping wildly like a drum, a primal beat drowning out all else. Gathering his courage, he turned slowly, eyes scanning the attic for any sign of the lurking menace. Fear gripped him, but he was determined not to let it consume him. To his horror, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, forming limbs, forming bones, contorting into shapes that were once human but had become something grotesque and unholy. The shadows danced like dark, spindly fingers reaching out for him, beckoning him closer with an unspoken promise of comfort that he knew instinctively was a lie. Each flicker and flutter made his skin crawl, as terror bubbled within him like a boiling pot. In that moment, abstract panic transformed into unbearable fear. Finn tried to scream, but the voice caught in his throat, choked by the weight of despair. The sensation of icy fingers tracing along his spine sent him deeper into the abyss of dread, and he stumbled back against the cold wooden floorboards, the chill seeping through his jeans. The shadows closed in around him as if they were alive, circling him like a pack of wolves, hungry for prey. As he caught a glimpse of something unrecognizable in the dark, something many-eyed, its visage a twisted nightmare, his breath caught in his throat. The creature was a travesty, an abomination of what once was, with mouths that opened like twisted gates to a world rotting from within. Its eyes glimmered with malice, reflecting a horrible understanding of his soul. Finn could feel the malignity of its gaze boring into him, digging inside the crevices of his mind, whispering sins he had never committed, urging him to join the darkness. He felt the mosque's power engulf him, transforming it from a mere object into a living thing, feeding off his terror, urging him to surrender, to give in to despair. Everything within him screamed out for freedom, yet something deep inside began to feel heavy, as if it were part of a dream he couldn't wake up from. Struggling with every ounce of strength, Finn pressed his palms against the mask, summoning all his will to remove it. He could feel the shadows thrumming with life around him, as if they were sentient beings, mocking him and enveloping him tighter in their damp embrace. It felt as if they were playing a sinister game, taunting him while he fought against an unseen enemy. He could hear their movements, a rustling, a shuffling, like dark secrets being passed from one shadow to another. The basements and hidden corners of his mind began to flicker with memories of laughter, friends, and sunlight flooding his thoughts. But the malevolent entity, that many-eyed creature, hushed those memories, swallowing them whole, making them disappear into a black void. Finn felt himself slipping away from those joyful thoughts, dragged deeper into despair. In a moment of breathless clarity, Finn understood that he was trapped. The mask had claimed him. Its power was insatiable, its craving for fear enormous. He felt his consciousness begin to fracture, splintering under the weight of darkness, leaving only a husk of who he once was. With a sudden surge of action, he pushed against the mask one last time, channeling every ounce of courage and hope he could muster. Finn could see the outlines of the shadows, stretching and shifting, and within those movements, he could almost discern a glimmer of light, the tiniest spark of bravery twinkling in the swirling dark. The light flickered like a candle fighting against the storm, and for a moment, it felt tangible. Not today, Finn screamed, pulling with everything he had. He tugged and yanked, his heart racing, sweat beading on his forehead. The tension in his body seemed to crackle with the energy of desperation. Suddenly, the mask gave a jolt, releasing a blast of dark energy that sent ripples through the thick air. He staggered backward, the mask still clinging to his face, but he could feel it loosening, the grip weakening for the first time. The creature, sensing its hold slipping away, let out an ear-splitting howl, a chorus of screams stitched together by agony and fury. The shadows erupted into chaos, swirling around him like a tempest. Finn screamed back, and in that moment, he refused to be afraid any longer. Finding strength in his defiance, he shouted to the emptiness, "I am not yours. I will not be afraid." With one final tug that felt like a surge of light breaking through a storm, he yanked the mask off and threw it across the attic, a fragile object shattered against the wooden beams. The echoes of the creature's shriek faded into the ether, as if it had been banished back to the depths from which it came. The shadows recoiled, dissipating like mist in the morning sun, retreating into corners and crevices, hiding from the illumination of his newfound courage. Finn collapsed to the floor, panting heavily, his heart still racing in the aftermath of that dark encounter. The attic felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the very air had shifted. He was drenched in sweat and trembling, but he had conquered a battle that had felt like a lifetime. With a cautious breath, he whispered, "It's over, for now." He understood that this shadowy battle might have been just a glimpse into a deeper struggle lurking in the corners of his town. But in that moment, he had gleaned a powerful lesson. Fear could only hold sway over those who let it. Gripping the memory of laughter, of friends and sunlight, he stood up, determined to face whatever awaited him next, his heart full of bravery, and his mind still buzzing with the echoes of his grandmother's wisdom. Days passed in Elder Spring, but time seemed to lose its meaning as the dull ache of despair wrapped around the town like a heavy cloak. Everyone noticed the changes in Finn. Once the joy of their little community, he had grown unfamiliar, his bright laughter a distant memory. Finn's friends watched with worried eyes as he wandered through life like a lost ghost, a mere shell of the boy they once knew. "Have you seen Finn?" one of them whispered to another during a game of hide and seek. "He doesn't even want to play anymore. He just sits there, staring." The adults in Elder Spring exchanged anxious glances. They, too, felt the weight of Finn's change. He seemed to exist in a world that was almost separate from theirs, always there but ever so far away. One mother gently squeezed her husband's hand when they saw Finn sitting alone on the swings, staring into the distance. It was like watching the sun set on a beautiful day, sad yet at the same time, painfully beautiful. Finn's laughter had faded like a dream upon waking. What was once bright and lively had become overshadowed by an unnatural stillness. Dark circles framed his eyes, which looked sunken and hollow. If you really studied him, you could see that Finn had become a portrait of unrecognizable sorrow, drifting through each day without truly feeling it anymore. Nights had turned into a battleground for Finn, filled with nightmares that clawed at his mind. In his dreams, shadows danced like flickering candles, taunting him as they whispered of his fears. They reminded him that he was trapped, lost in the darkness that seemed to have a life of its own. Though he longed for freedom, it felt as if an unseen force held him in chains, binding him to this world filled with worry and despair. Despite the terrible sorrow that weighed like a thick fog around his heart, a strange compulsion led Finn back to the attic, the old, dusty room filled with forgotten memories. It was as if something was calling to him, wrapping around his thoughts and drawing him closer, like the sirens of old who beckoned sailors to rocky shores. With heavy steps, Finn climbed the staircase once more, each creak echoing his reluctance. As he entered the attic, the familiar sight greeted him. The grotesque mask lay on its pedestal, an eerie guardian amidst the dust and shadows. It always shimmered in the dim light, evoking both dread and a bizarre fascination. With fingers trembling, Finn approached the mask, entranced by its sinister beauty. He lifted it once more, even though the voices in his head were screaming at him to stop. The mask was like a dark lure, whispering sweet promises that calmed his turbulent mind. What could it reveal? What secrets lay dormant behind its painted surface? Yet deep down, he felt a shiver, a warning from his very soul. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to step back into the comforting embrace of the world outside. But the shadows had already sown their tendrils into his heart, leaving him unable to resist. When Finn finally slipped the mask over his face, he felt an undeniable connection pulse through him. It throbbed in time with his heartbeats, and for a moment, he was not just Finn. The weight of his reality melted away, replaced by a swirling darkness that invited him to explore. Suddenly, he found himself gazing into a strange new reality. A grotesque landscape stretched before him, filled with faceless figures who danced an eternal waltz of sorrow. They had an odd smile plastered on their unseeing faces, and their hollow eyes wandered, forever searching for something they could never find. A creature lurked just out of sight, a shadowy beast that watched Finn with a hungry gaze. What before him had been filled with terror twisted into something else, a feeling of belonging. It felt strange to Finn, but somehow, he understood. The mask was preparing him for something greater. Waves of power began surging through him, unfathomable and intoxicating. But intertwined with this feeling was a sinister warning, a voice deep within him echoing his fears, a reminder of what was left behind, what had been lost. The distinction between the living and the dead blurred, the mask warping his senses, dragging him into a reality he struggled to grasp. The whispers grew louder. They promised a kind of greatness if only he would acknowledge the darkness within him. Compelled by an evil pull, Finn stepped forward, unsure if he was seeking freedom or becoming trapped. As he edged closer to the dancing figures, they began to dissolve into ash and dust around him. Their echoing laughter filled the air, a haunting reminder of the joy that had vanished. Finn's heart raced as he began to recognize their faces, his friends and family, once full of life. They had all turned into distorted versions of themselves, mere reflections of what they had been, shadows looming just beyond his reach. Panic surged as he recoiled, but there was nowhere to run. The weight of the mask dragged him deeper into its grasp, every heartbeat dizzying. The realization gripped him. The mask consumed them. It didn't just reveal horrors, it fed on their joy and essence, swallowing the light until only darkness remained. He felt the shadows tight around him, squeezing tighter with each passing moment. They were intoxicating yet terribly consuming. Finn closed his eyes tightly, wishing he could escape from this nightmare. But deep down, he felt the pull of despair beckoning him closer. The laughter that once characterized his life echoed in his mind, transforming into a cacophony of anguish. He was no longer just Finn. He was lost among the forsaken, caught in a tapestry of darkness that now bound him for eternity. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Flickering images of joy danced at the edge of his memory, but the more he fought, the more they slipped through his fingers like grains of sand. Every heartbeat resonated with despair, drowning him in a flood of shadows, engulfing him completely. In a moment of surrender, Finn let the shadows consume him whole. The last vestiges of who he was faded into nothingness, leaving behind a boy once eager to explore the world. Now he was another lost soul amid the darkness, twisted in a web of fear and sorrow. The attic, once a sanctuary of childhood dreams, transformed into a prison forged from his choices. Finn stood irrevocably trapped, forever entwined with shadows that had claimed him as one of their own. Outside, the town continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the transformation occurring in the attic, unaware that the laughter of one of their own had turned to silence. They went about their lives, but in one dim corner of their serene world, Finn was becoming something altogether different, something bound by shadows and whispers, his fate forever sealed by the chilling lure of the mask. Little did they know, the darkness that had ensnared Finn stretched far beyond the attic, echoing through the town like an unseen storm, ready to unleash the horrors that lingered beneath the surface. The shadows may have whispered of power and greatness, but Finn would soon discover that with darkness came a price. A cost he could never truly understand until it was far too late. As Finn stood among the faded shadows of his past, he felt the mask tighten around him, binding him to a cycle of haunting despair. And in that chilling moment, he understood that the mask had not just changed him, it had consumed him completely, reducing his once vibrant spirit to mere whispers in the wind, chasing shadows that would never again dance in the light. Weeks turned into months, yet to Finn, it felt like an eternity had slipped by, stretching on with no end in sight. The small town of Elderspring continued with its everyday chaos. Children's laughter rang out as they splashed in the river, carefree and unaware of the dangerous darkness that nestled quietly at the heart of their town. The sun rose and set, seasons changed, and life seemed to carry on as usual. But deep within the shadows of Finn's world, the attic remained alive with whispers, echoing the fate of a boy lost to darkness. It was as if the whispers were like ghosts, swirling around him with soft voices that spoke of his fears and pains. The foreboding mask continued its eternal watch, feasting on the fragments of hope that still existed in Finn's heart. It was a predator in the shadows, absorbing everything that might bring light. The mask was not just an object, it was a creature of sorts, a dark entity that thrived in despair and devoured joy like a hungry beast. As weeks melted away into months, Finn found himself only more entrapped by the chilling aura that seemed to seep into his veins, filling him with a sense of dread. Finn had become one with the darkness, the shadows wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. The laughter from the happy children outside felt distorted and distant, echoing in his mind like a haunting melody of sorrow. It was a strange feeling, being able to hear joy yet being so far removed from it. The sounds reverberated through him, building a painful clash that felt like an unholy symphony filled with sorrow and longing. Shadows danced around him, swirling like mist as they intertwined with his very being, casting him deeper into a memory retrieval of both his own past and those of others who had fallen to the same curse. He drifted through their memories, glimpsing their stories through their eyes, feeling their struggles as if they were his own. He saw their plights, the moments that drove them to their own secret paths of darkness. Faces of boys and girls he once knew flickered in front of him in fleeting glimpses, their expressions twisted in grotesque horror that told a tragic tale of astonishment. Each one had succumbed to the mosque's luring call, just like he had. He felt their silent cries wrap around him, a heavy shroud that buried him under layers of despair. Their shadows whispered secrets of the world beyond, the blissful innocence he had known. Each soul had willingly walked into oblivion, guided by the soft, glowing promises whispered by the mask. Mortality faded into obscurity as it too was devoured by the erosive darkness of the attic, which left only a void where hope had previously flourished. Finn sometimes found himself longing for that glimmer of hope, but it was always just out of reach. Nights came when the moon was eclipsed, painting the room a deep black, and it was during those nights that he felt the presence of the creature again. It was a chilling feeling creeping over him, making every part of him tingle with fear. It was as though the shadows were reaching out with icy fingers, probing him in search of the next victim, the next curious soul eager to join the malevolent dance within the maelstrom of fear. The malevolent whispers that had become companions to his solitude echoed through the dark corners of his mind, filling him with a combination of dark delight and heavy dread. "Just one more, Finn," they would murmur softly, "we can grow stronger together." Their voices wrapped around him, sweet and sinister. In the flickers of his former self, Finn occasionally felt the urge to cry out for help. His heart would leap, hoping to find a lifeline, yet his voice was held captive by the mosque's power, shackled within the silence of despair. The trapped souls reminded him through their muffled wails that submission was the only way forward, a twisted acceptance of an unholy fate waiting to claim him. Every time he resisting the darkness that was both comforting and terrifying, he felt the abyss creep closer, ready to envelop him in its cold embrace. He often felt a unique connection to each shadow he had become acquainted with. Each had a story. Some were tales of bravery, while others were marked by foolishness, yet all ended in the same tragic way. He felt their pain, their sorrow, the regret that haunted them eternally. It was like an invisible thread tethering him to them, pulling him deeper into the unknown. He felt as though he were wrestling within a nightmare, one that could end at any moment, yet somehow kept dragging him deeper into darkness. One fateful night, Finn felt a sudden icy pull, one that was even more potent than before. It tugged at the very essence of his being, teasing him as if the shadows waged war against each other for control over his soul. The shadowy figures around him began to shimmer in the air, swirling together to take form as they stretched their hollow hands toward him, reaching for him with an unsettling longing. The distorted figures weaved and collided, forming a chaotic dance that would have been fascinating if it hadn't filled Finn with such dread. Their hollow eyes shone with malevolence, glistening in the dark with a hunger that could never be satisfied. Finn was overwhelmed as they pulled him into their dance, an eternal waltz of despair and acceptance. Anguish clawed at him, ripping at Finn's core as he succumbed fully to the shadow world. The weight of his past crushed him like a heavy stone, pulling him beneath waves of darkness so thick he thought he would drown. It felt hopeless to resist any longer. Amidst the chaos, a final thought lingered in his mind, like a flickering light in an enveloping void. It was a fleeting ember of recognition, a memory that spoke to him of freedom once fluttering like a delicate moth grasping for the warmth of light in the endless night. Yet now, the very freedom he sought had turned into chains, binding him to the grotesque embrace of the hollow mask. Finn, the boy devoured by curiosity, had vanished completely within the spiraling darkness, lost forever in a realm of shadows. Once bright eyes that sparkled with dreams of adventure now became void, absorbing every illusion of happiness until there was nothing left. The attic door would remain sealed, a chilling reminder of the price that had been paid for his ignorance. The mask, with its hollow eyes gleaming like cold stars in the darkness, patiently awaited its next victim, its hunger relentless as it lurked behind the shadows of Elderspring. The town of Elderspring, blissfully unaware of the horrors hiding beneath the surface of their ordinary lives, continued to thrive. Days rolled into one another, the children laughed, played, and danced through their innocent lives, while the shadows grew thicker. Finn's essence merged with the darkness, enveloping him in a world where there was no returning light. As time wore on, the memories of Finn began to blur, slipping away into the quicksand of time. The attic became a prison filled with whispers, the mask feeding on the fleeting thoughts of forgotten joy. There was no glimmer of hope left in this forsaken place, only the relentless thrum of despair echoing through the ages, taunting the living and beckoning to the curious. The darkness danced around him, celebrating another victory. Shadows intertwined in a perpetual cycle of horror, a macabre ballet in which only despair lingered. The whispers became a mantra that lulled him into a false sense of belonging, a twisted comfort in a realm where joy was merely a memory. And so, Finn found himself trapped, sharing space with the lost souls who had wandered just like him, curious, brave, and ultimately doomed. The nights blended together, and with each passing moment, shadows continued their eternal, wicked play, slipping into the dreams of those who dared to be brave. As the children of Elderspring slept peacefully, dreaming of adventures and laughter, Finn and the others remained in their eternal night, lost, yet waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close, unaware of the peril that lurked just beyond the attic door.